Hello, everyone. Good morning. On behalf of JL Del Rio, we would like to give you a warm welcome to this webinar session that we have prepared for all of our clients and friends related to the Tax Reform 2019. Thank you very much for making time in your agenda to join us for this session. My name is Leonardo Gomez. I'm the Tax Associate in charge of Monterrey office in JL Del Rio. And here with me is my colleague Cynthia Yanez, Tax Manager in the office as well in Monterrey.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, everyone. So the idea of this webinar session is to discuss with you a little bit and to inform you about the most relevant changes related to the economic package for 2019. There has been a lot of information in the news and in some other publications related to the changes. So the idea of this webinar session will be to keep you informed on the most relevant ones. So going down directly to our presentation, what will be the topics that we will be discussing today? There will be four main topics that we will be reviewing with you. The first one, it's a general analysis of the federal income law, which we will review the framework of 2019 versus 2018. We will review as well some economic indicators for Mexico in this year 2019, as well what were the changes in tax stimuli for this year. And one of the most relevant changes is the fact of the elimination of the universal compensation. We will review a little bit about that part and some other relevant aspects related everything to the federal income law. On the second part, we will be reviewing a new tax stimuli decree for the North Border Zone. We will review the decree and all the applicable rules that are related to the decree that in general terms offers various benefits in terms of income tax and VAT for certain taxpayers that could be subject to them. We will review on the third part very briefly what is the expectation of the government for fiscalization or audits by electronic means for 2019. And as well, we will review final conclusions and consideration. So without more delay, we will start with the analysis, a general overview of the federal income law in 2019. In December 15 of the past year, the new president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who is part of a new party in Mexico that had not been elected in a lot of years in the past, submitted to the Congress the new economic package for 2019. The package in general terms contained three main documents. The first one is the federal income law, which contemplates all the revenues and all the forecasts budgeted for 2019 the government contemplates to collect. The federal expense law, which explains how the budget will be expensed through the year, and the general criteria of economic policy in 2019, which contemplates general indicators and what are the expectations for Mexico in 2019. In general terms, those documents tries to look for four different areas or to cover four different areas. Which is to improve the economic conditions for the people who has less funds, so the poor people in Mexico, as well is planning to have the economy in Mexico more self-sufficient. Also, the document aims to look for a reduction in the crime and corruption, and also to incorporate an austerity and anti-corruption plan in Mexico. So, as the president had promised in his campaign in 2019, he complied the fact that he was not going to increase the current income taxes nor the VAT in Mexico, and he is not going to incorporate new taxes to the current ones for 2019. He did comply with that promise in his campaign when he submitted the new economic package to the Congress, and we can see that there are no new taxes and no increase in the current taxes. But on the other hand, actually, the president is contemplated a reduction in the income tax and the VAT for those taxpayers that are established in the north border zone, which are granted not directly in the income tax or the VAT law, but are granted in a specific document, which is a tax stimulus that has an application for 2 years. So in general terms, economic indicators in Mexico for 2019, it is foreseen an inflation rate of 3.4% compared to the 3.7% that was in 2018, I'm sorry. So there is expected a decrease in the inflation in 2019. Also, the average exchange rate in Mexico for this year, it's 20 pesos for $1. In terms of the GDP, it is contemplated a growth for 1.5% up to 2.5%, and the average price of the oil in Mexico would be $55 per barrel, which in the prior year, in 2018, the price was for 62. So now in this year, we are seeing a reduction in the price of the oil. What can we say in terms of the budget that the government contemplates to collect? So we are in this slide, we can see a comparison versus the revenues the government contemplated to collect in 2018 versus the ones in 2019. And we can see that in the overall basis, the government plans to increase its collection in 10.6%. And in the terms of taxes, specifically line number 1, which is related to taxes, where we can find in here the income tax, the value-added tax, and the special tax on production and services, we see an increase in 12%. Something that it is worth to mention is the fact that even though we are watching an increase in the budget of the revenues to be collected, how is this possible if we had seen in the prior slide that the government does not contemplate to increase the revenues, to increase the taxes, I'm sorry. But on the other hand, it is contemplated to reduce them by applying the stimuli to a specific taxpayer. So one of the reasons the government is contemplating to increase their incomes for collection in 2019 is because of the fact that the government is going to be more efficient in terms of electronic audits. Instead of physical audits that they carried out in the prior years, now the government is going to be more proactive and use all the information that we have been submitted in the past couple of years for electronic accounting and some other information to carry out electronic accounting, which is less expensive for them and it's more efficient for them. In terms of collection per segment, we can see that 80% of all the revenues related to federal governmental incomes are related to the income tax, the value-added tax, and the special tax on production and services. So 80% of all the taxes are caused because of these 3 main taxes in Mexico, which, as I mentioned, are not going to increase anything in 2019. In terms of income for organisms and companies, we can see that 70% corresponds to the electricity company in Mexico and the oil company in Mexico. So within the revenues for these main 3 taxes and the revenues collected from the oil company and the electricity company, pretty much is covered 90% of all the revenues budgeted in the forecast for 2019. One important change as well in this income federal law is the increase on the special tax on production and services. That this special tax on production on services, it is already included in the price of the gasoline. So it means that in 2019, the rates will be increased. Therefore, the price of the gasoline, of course, will be increased as well. In the tab in here, or in the slide in here, you can see that the average increase in all the types of gasoline in Mexico represents 4.7% in terms of this new or this special tax on production and services. Another important change in Mexico is the fact of the increase in the minimum wage. During a lot of years in the past, I would say that 30, maybe 40 years in the past, there had no been any major increases in the salaries as we are watching right now in 2019. In 2018, the general minimum salary for all Mexican territory was for 88.36 pesos. And now in 2019, the government is making like two groups for the determination of the minimum wage. A first group is going to be determined for all the employees that provide services within the north border region. For those specific persons, the minimum wage increases the double. So from 88.36 went up to 176.72 pesos daily. And in the rest of the country, except for this north border region, the increase represented 16.21%. According to the National Statistic and Geographic Institute, this measure of increasing the minimum salary in Mexico should benefit more than 2 million workers. The government expressed that he understands that this might not be as a big increase as other countries. However, it's a good step in the road of keeping increasing the minimum salary in Mexico. In the following slide, you can find the 6 states and the 46 cities and the 43 cities, that comprehends the north border region. So these 43 cities are the ones that will be subject to the new minimum wage of 176 pesos daily. And for the rest of the country that is not located in this area, the new salary would be 102 pesos daily.
Okay, so also included on the income federal law, we can find a segment regarding tax stimuli. So we are going to talk about 5 different stimuli that pretty much the object and the benefit for it remains the same through 2018. However, we can see that in some of them, the authorities is denying the application of such incentives during the tax installment calculation that's done on a monthly basis. And in some cases, it's only leaving the benefit up to the annual tax return, which can possibly cause a company to make payments during the year, even though at the end the tax base may be lower and therefore probably end up with a balance in favor. The tax stimuli that's contemplated for 2018 and as well for 2019 can be the use of diesel, which is some sort of oil for machinery. Also, diesel that can be used in vehicles that are used for transportation of products in Mexican territory, and also to those that are exclusively dedicated to transportation and that they use the national toll system in Mexico, as well for specific oils and fossil fuels that are used in the manufacturing process. So it's a matter of reviewing in which cases we can continue to use these stimuli for tax installments and which of them we can only use for annual tax return. Another significant change is that these credits can only be applicable to own corporate income tax while in the past there was the possibility to using it against third-party withholdings that the company had to pay to the authorities. Another benefit that year after year we have to review that is still applicable on the federal income law, it's the availability to reduce from tax installments base the profit sharing that has been paid during the prior year. So I would like to let you know that this benefit is still available for 2019. So the profit sharing that has been paid in 2019 can be decreased from the tax base from May to December in equal parts until the end of the year. So that's just a reminder that there's a benefit that's still out there for taxpayers. Another benefit that was included on the federal income law is that usually companies that have been authorized as donees, they have the rule that they need to stick to its object of operations. They have a very delimited object and they need to use the funds for that object. However, the authorities created this facility that certain donees they can use part of the fund to give or to grant to other entities that are dedicated to rescue or reconstruction activities due to natural disasters. So this is a possibility that's applicable only to donees that are authorized, so they can distribute part of their donations to these other entities when they are performing this type of activities. On another note, the authority also released a benefit regarding vulnerable activities or regarding anti-money laundering law, in which they are giving a time frame in a regularization period in which taxpayers can do all the filings of prior pending reports with no imposition of fine regarding the lack of filings for such reports. And also, they are offering a waiver of existing fines. The reason for this is that with this, the authorities are planning to actually receive information that taxpayers have been missing to provide since July 2013 up to December 2018. So with the idea, as Leonardo mentioned, that being more efficient in collection and in using the information that the authority already have, we see this as a form of the authority to receive more information that then they could go after certain vulnerable activities. So the requirement for this is that taxpayers who have missed these reports, they need to be up to date with the filings for January 2019, which the report needs to be filed in February 2019.
And this is just to complement this part, Cynthia, this is a very interesting incentive from the government, because we may remember that the fines for not filing the reports on time to the government was for 200,000 pesos and could go up to 4 million pesos per notice that was not filed. And this specifically in this case, it was not applicable, the part of the extempore that you can file them out extemporarily. So just because of the fact that you did not file it on time and you want to file it 1 day after, 2 days after, etc., you are automatically subject to the penalty. So some taxpayer just decided to not file it ever because they didn't want to pay for that penalty. Therefore, the government notices and releases this new incentive in which they're going to kind of forgive all those penalties, but they want to receive the information from them.
Very important. So our recommendation in all cases will be to do the pending filings before the due date for the report of January, which will be February 2019, so taxpayers can stick or can apply this benefit and therefore not be subject for the prior existing fines. On another note, there was an increase on the interest withholding by the bank institutions on the interest earned for the taxpayers. The withholding rate applicable in 2018 was 0.46%. However, in 2019, we have a significant increase that will go to 1%, 0.04. That will be withholding every time a taxpayer earns interest by the bank.
Okay, now we're going to jump in one of the most relevant changes related in the federal income law, and it's the part of the elimination of the universal compensation. Let me try to explain for those who are not familiar with this concept of the universal compensation. This concept pretty much refers to the possibility when a taxpayer generates a favor balance that could be used in the future to offset versus taxes due of different nature. That was contemplated, or that was the definition of the universal compensation. So for putting an example, it meant that you could generate a favor balance of value-added tax, for example, or VAT, and you could use it to offset taxes of different nature. For example, income tax. For example, income tax withholding. For example, etc. Some other taxes, and not necessarily VAT favor balance versus a VAT payable.
Which was a way for taxpayers to recover balances in favor faster and avoiding to go through a tax refund process. So instead of filing for the refund, they could offset to other payable taxes as mentioned by Leonardo.
Correct. So on the screen that on the slide that you're watching right now, on the left part, you can see the old definition, and on the right part, you can see the new definition and the new modification in Article 25 of the federal income law, which we took the liberty of highlighting in red the things that had been removed from the prior article. So you can see that now in the definition, it is not allowed to offset favor balances with third-party withholdings, and we can see it in red that in the past you could use it to provide and use it for different federal taxes. And now the application says that taxpayers that has favor balance can only use them to pay taxes of their own debt and provided by from the same tax. So this means, for example, that a company that generates a favor balance of income tax may only use it to offset future income taxes. It will not be valid anymore that companies generate a favor balance of VAT and use it to offset income tax withholdings, etc. This is one of the most relevant changes that definitely will have an impact in the cash flow of the companies, because as Cynthia was mentioning, you will only have the opportunity to make the compensation with these taxes, and in the past you used to get used to the offset to avoid going for the process of the refund. Now this new modification, if we go to the following slide, we can see that Article 6 of the VAT law as well on the left side allowed that VAT balances could be used to offset past VAT amounts due. But now with the new definition on the right side of the slide, you can see that favor balances can only be used to credit VAT balances in the future. So this will be applicable for favor balances generated as of 2019 and going forward until further notice. So in summary, we can see that favor balances cannot be applicable to offset any type of withholdings, which most of the most relevant or most frequent withholdings were the ones for salaries, were the ones for payment made to foreign residents, such as royalties, interest, etc., will not be valid anymore to offset. What happens to the favor balances that I already had before this new regulation? So we're talking about the balances generated for as of December 31st, 2018, I'm sorry. Okay, there was a rule that was published by the government, the rule 2.3.19 in the sixth modification to the miscellaneous tax resolution, which comes to clarify what will happen to the favor balances that had been generated in the past. So these favor balances, the article just in summary mentions that we may opt to compensate those amounts with taxes on our own. So even though they belong to different nature. So for putting an example, this means that those favor balances that are generated in the past will still be valid to offset versus taxes of different nature as long as they are own taxes. Own taxes would be income tax, would be VAT, would be a special tax on products and services, not withholdings, not withholdings of any type, salaries, royalties, interest, etc. But at least it gives you the opportunity to still use those prior favor balances to offset versus own corporate taxes. So, for example, if I were to generate a balance in 2018 for VAT, I will still be possible to use it to offset income taxes. Or if I generate a favor balance of income tax, I would still be able to use it to offset versus other own taxes, but never to withholdings. One of the requirements just to mention, one of the requirements for applying this is that taxpayers will need to file to the government in their website a notice in which they reflect the amount that they are compensating or that they are using to offset these taxes, which in the past it was not necessarily to be filed anymore because there was a rule that exempts taxpayers to make that filing. However, this rule mentions that we will need to keep making the filing of these notices.
Whenever we compensate those remaining balances generated in 2018.
Correct. So if we were to make a summary of the application in 2019 for the universal compensation, there are two baskets. The favor balances that were generated before 2019, and those can be used to compensate their own taxes, even though they have a different nature, or we can still request them in refund or apply as a credit in VAT.
And so this is like the way out of the universal compensation, is the last cases in which we can apply universal compensation.
Correct, because at some point those favor balances will be cleared out or will be concluded.
And whenever we apply this option, we need to remind that we need to file the form that you just mentioned, the compensation form, format 41, right?
Correct. And then we have another basket, if we were to put like in a kind of a summary. These second baskets are all the favor balances that are generated in 2019. In summary, those can only be used with taxes of the same nature. VAT versus VAT, income tax versus income tax, etc. And in both baskets, we cannot use favor balances to offset any type of withholdings. Just as a final note, as you can see in the same slide, the initiative or the private sector is currently reviewing with the government and is having some talks and some discussions about if there is the possibility to have the universal compensation, and as it used to be in the past for certain taxpayers that could be considered as that they are up to date in their tax obligation, etc. However, it's still on negotiations, and so far, as we explained, this is the new procedure to use the compensation of favor balances. This slide that you're watching in here pretty much is a summary of what the federal income law mentions and with all the changes. So we have, for example, favor balances generated before December 31st, 2018 of corporate income tax. We still can use it to offset corporate income tax, value-added tax, and a special tax for products and services. But in any case, we cannot apply it with withholdings. If we were to generate on the first, as well on the first part of the chart in here, favor balances of prior to December 31st, 2018 of VAT, we can still use them to apply to corporate taxes, income, for a special tax on products and services, and for VAT as well with some criteria. And you can see in the part in the slide in here, the part for the special tax on products and services. And for the balances generated in 2019 and going forward, you can see the change in there, that the tab mentions that corporate income tax can only use to offset corporate income tax. The value-added tax, it says no with VAT, but it means that you cannot use it to go back and apply to VAT in the past. You can still use it VAT versus VAT, but that is not considered a compensation, but it's considered a credit. So that procedure is still valid. And if you were to have favor balances of special tax on products and services, you can use to offset amounts pending to pay for the same nature. But again, in this second image or in this second chart, you can see that in no scenario you can apply to withholdings.
Okay, so with this, our recommendation will be to be careful of cash flow planning, as with this change, the authority have not rejected the possibility of recovering the funds. It's just limiting the fact that you can offset to other taxes, and in cases where balance in favor are generated, taxpayers could be forced to go into the refund process, which will only be applicable through a review by the tax authority. So we just want to make clear that the possibility of recovering the funds is still there. However, the authority wants to not give those amounts away that easy, so they're forcing to go to the review process through the tax reform procedure. So now we're going to talk about the new decree on tax stimuli on the North Border Zone. As Leonardo mentioned, there were no changes to corporate laws such as income tax or VAT laws, but these benefits were granted on December 31st, 2018 through this specific decree. So the purpose of this decree per the authority is to improve competitiveness of the states located at the north region of the country, which they're usually in competition with the US market. This will help retain the customer and reactivate the regional Mexican economy at the border. And this will, of course, raise the incomes, generate jobs in the area, and therefore welfare for the population, which will eventually contribute to collection of taxes. So we need to consider that this decree was published on December 31st, 2018. It has a time effective of January 1st, 2019, and it is considered to be valid for 2019 and 2020. Now, there's been comments about the possibility of extending the life of this decree, but as of now, it is expected to only be for 2019 and 2020 to see this growth in the economy at the border. And also on item number 4 and item number 5, these are the benefits that are provided in here. We will see an income tax benefit as well as a VAT benefit. Now, it is important to keep in mind that this decree is specific to the north border area, which is delimited by 6 states at the border and also 43 cities. These cities are the same ones that we talked about regarding the increase on the minimum wage. So these are cities that are close around 25 kilometers to the border. So we will need to review the cities in which it's determined to make sure if a company can apply for the benefits. Now, the two major benefits are separated between income tax and VAT. For income tax, it establishes a credit of the third of the income tax that's generated in a fiscal year for the taxpayer. However, this third can only be applicable in the proportion to the incomes that are triggered at the border zone area, representing towards the total of the revenues of a company. So in a case that a company generates the total of its revenue at the border zone, then we could be talking about that this stimuli reduces the income tax from 30% up to 20%. Now, it is important to mention that it's not considered a reduction of the rate to 20%. However, it's a credit. The companies still need to calculate its tax on the 30% rate, but then apply this third of the income tax to their income tax expense. So eventually, it can be a 20% income tax expense. Now, the other benefit is regarding VAT, and this is also a credit that it's 15% of the general tax rate, which is 16%. So in this case, the authority is contemplating, as for simplifying processes, an 8% reduced rate on the value for the activities performed at the border zone. So in this case, for practical purposes, we can see a reduction in the rate from 16% up to 8%. Now, general terms about this decree is that it applies to companies and to individual taxpayers in Mexico. However, regarding individual taxpayers, they need to be within the commercial or professional service activities. This can also be applicable to residents abroad that are considered to have a permanent establishment in Mexico. And one of the requirements, as we just mentioned, for income tax is that the revenue needs to come exclusively from the northern border region. Regarding VAT, the sales of goods, the rendering of the services, or the leasing of places needs to occur as well on this border zone in the 43 cities that we just talked about. And it's also important that the benefits in this decree are not considered as taxable income, as in some cases other benefits can be. These are not. So these are not added back to our tax base. And also, the taxpayers that apply these benefits do not need to file the notice for tax stimuli that's established on the federal tax code. So there are other groups of taxpayers that cannot be subject to the benefits of this decree, and these are basically other types of taxpayers that already have beneficial tax treatment. For example, maquila companies, even though they are located at the border, they cannot apply for these benefits. Tax incorporation taxpayers, group of companies, optional system for coordinated, they cannot apply for this. Also, other activities that are being overseen by the authorities, such as labor subcontracting, they cannot apply for this benefit. The decree also established that digital commerce and intangible income, these are not considering within the benefits of the decree. The reason is that the use of these goods, digital commerce or intangible incomes, do not necessarily remain or benefit taxpayers at the border. Therefore, these revenues cannot be subject for the decree.
Just in the part of the labor subcontracting, that it's a company that it's not allowed to apply these stimuli. It is worth to mention that it refers to insourcing and outsourcing. So both type of companies that pretty much like subcontracts labor work will not be subject to apply these tax stimuli.
That's correct. Thank you. Other type of taxpayers that cannot apply this benefit are those who have demonstrated a behavior that's not well seen by the authorities, such as having simulated transactions or such as being on the blacklist that are published by the tax authority. And this will apply to the taxpayer or to the shareholders of the taxpayers. So whenever a company has been within those so-called blacklist, they cannot apply for the benefits of this decree. Or if that is not the case, they can provide the most recent period that they have, and also have the accounting registry for the investments that they have incurred to demonstrate that they will have enough resources to provide services at the northern border area. Also, taxpayers need to demonstrate the use of new assets over there. So they need to provide the CFDI when they purchase that equipment, as well as the bank statement that shows the actual payment for that equipment, as well as the accounting entry. And they find out that the taxpayer is not in compliance, they can cancel their benefit registration. And if that is the case, as Leonardo mentioned, the taxpayer needs to go back and amend and pay the right taxes for the year that the benefits were applicable without being complying with the requirements. There's a possibility for taxpayers to demonstrate that they are indeed in compliance, and in that case they can proceed with the application of the benefits. But other than that, if they do not respond to the authority, they fall out of the benefits of the decree. Now we talked about real-time verifications by the authority. This can be done by the authorities on a semi-annual basis, and this will be notified to the tax mailbox for the taxpayer. So it is important to review this tax mailbox and make sure to accept the review for the authorities. Otherwise, if the company does not accept the review, it can be understood that they do not collaborate with the authorities and they will fall out of the benefits for the decree and also go back and amend for the period that they file the benefits without being compliant to. As mentioned, this decree is effective January 1st, 2019, and it is expected to remain in force for 2019 and 2020. Also, for December 2020, it is established on the second article that for income tax, if invoices were generated in 2020, taxpayers need to actually collect that money within the 10 natural days of 2021 for these revenues to be applicable within this benefit. So this is to avoid to generate a larger amount of invoices without it being real transactions for the company. Also, for VAT, Article 3rd establishes a 10 natural day period in 2021 to collect those revenues in order to be applicable for the reduced 8% VAT rate.
On that matter, it would be important that when when the date approach, you make sure that the invoices that you billed still in December, you do collect them during the first 10 days of 2021. Otherwise, any invoice that you had billed would need to be canceled and rebilled, but now with the income with the VAT rate of 16% instead of 8% as you did in the past.
Correct. And in that regard, there is a transitory article saying that because the authority just released the catalogs for the CFDI and for the reduced 8% rate, taxpayers can defer the issuance of the sales CFDI up to May 1st, 2019. And this is also because as of today, companies are still to receive the authorization to be included on these programs. So taxpayers that get this authorization can defer their CFDIs from January 1st up to April 30, 2019, as long as they fully issue that total of its revenues on May 1st, 2019.
Correct. So now we're going to review very briefly because pretty much we have already covered all the time that we have, but we're going to review very briefly, or we want to discuss with you the part of the fiscalization of the government by electronic means. As you may remember, electronic accounting started to be applicable in July 2014, and it has been doing it so far. Companies are obligated to file on a monthly basis their chart of accounts, their electronic trial balance, and the journal entries, those when are requested by the authorities. Usually are requested or can be requested when you are facing a refund process for paper balances. So these three items comprehends the filings in terms of electronic accounting. We have been filing information since July 2014 until pretty much as of today. We're talking about 4 years and a half maybe, or filings. And there are questions in the air. So who has received any audits of this type?
Not many taxpayers have.
No, correct. Not many taxpayers. But with all this amount of information that we have been providing to the government for the past 4 years and a half, what has the authority done with that information? To be honest, we have not received a lot of electronic audits in the clients that we advise. However, that does not mean that the government is not planning to carry them out. Actually, in 2019, the government is planning to put more emphasis in the electronic audits, because as I mentioned at the beginning, are less expensive for them, are easier for them to throw multiple audits to multiple taxpayers instead of sending one person knocking to each taxpayer's door. And it is more efficient for them in terms of timing, in terms of uh, pass information. So it is easier for them to make audits for electronic accounting. So what we're watching right now in 2019, and what we're recommending to all the clients and friends that we advise, is to make sure that everything is in order. Make sure that before you submit some information to the government, like on a monthly basis, the trial balance, etc., even though we might submit some information as preliminary with the idea of a couple of days later, I amend the information and then I correct it because I didn't have enough time to file it correct since the beginning. Well, be careful with those practices, because the government, it is not possible to withdraw some information that you had already sent to the government. It is true that you might send a trial balance and then you may amend, and the government might consider the second trial balance as final, but that does not mean that they will not have the right to look at the first trial balance that you sent with preliminary information. And how come that you're making changes right now? What causes those changes? Those are the questions and the red flags that taxpayers should be avoiding when sending their electronic accounting with more detail, with more care. So that's pretty much the perspective that we're recommending into our clients in terms of electronic accounting to avoid any type of electronic audit from the government. So what would be the conclusions that we have in here? Well, as we have mentioned, there are no new taxes in 2019 that we foresee, besides the current income tax and VAT that remains the same when we review directly the income tax law and the VAT law.
Okay, for those taxpayers who apply the tax incentives on the income law regarding the use of diesel or the use of fossil oils, they need to take care of the new application form that the authority has released, and more so make sure that the benefits do not apply in all cases for tax installments, and in any cases for any withholding taxes from third parties.
Correct. In the part as well as we saw, there are some tax incentives for the income tax and as well for VAT. For the North Border Decree, we suggest to review their applicability for the stimulus, and just make sure that the companies that are subject to it really get hold to it, because there are important benefits that could be applicable.
Mm-hmm. Now, and regarding the tax inspection by electronic means that Leonardo just talked about, really make a deep review that correct filing is being performed on all sides on information, call it tax installment, call it trial balance. It's important to make sure that all information received by tax authority is filed correctly.
Mm-hmm. And as it is mentioned in tab number 3, just a part of the universal compensation. There are some changes in there, and Cynthia, like Cynthia was mentioning some minutes ago, it would be very important to be very proactive on filing the tax refunds, because it will definitely could have an impact on the cash flow of the company in case we are not very proactive in that part.
Okay, thank you, Leonardo. So up to here, this has been our presentation of the tax reforms for 2019. We thank you for your preference. Now, during this time, we received some questions from the audience. I would like to mention a few, Leonardo, if we could answer to them.
Sure.
One of the questions is, it says, if the compensation is not allowed, can I still request refund of balances in favor?
Yes, that is a good question. The answer is yes. If the compensation is not allowed, companies can still request a refund for their balances in favor.
Okay. And another question is, are the forms to request benefits for the north border are published and ready to file yet? So when the authorities released on January 7 the Sixth Amendment to the Miscellanea rules, and they indeed published the forms to file for this request, they have also established a procedure which will be through the tax mailbox, and the application forms are available. So in all cases, we will recommend to go and review if the benefits are applicable to your company and prepare the files, because remember there are deadlines to file the request. For VAT is February 7 and for income tax is March 31st. Another question says, can a company be eligible to request benefit for North Border Zone if there is a branch located in there? That means not a tax domicile.
Yes, the answer to that one is yes. So, for example, it could be a case of a company that its tax domicile is located in Mexico City. It's not in the North Border Zone, but has 3 branches, and those 3 branches are located in the North Border Zone. In that case, that taxpayer, even though his tax domicile is not in the border zone, but because of the fact that he has branches in there, he still can apply for the benefit as long as he complies with all the requirements.
But the branches, they need to be registered for a taxpayer database. That's also very important.
Correct.
Another question, it says, I used to offset withholdings related to payments to foreign residents. If I have previous balances in favor, can I still offset those withholdings?
Yes, in this case, the answer is no. You, as we mentioned, unfortunately, for balances generated in the past, from 2018 and in the past, and for balances generated from 2019 and going forward, in those type of favor balances, you cannot use to offset any type of withholdings, nor for salaries to employees, for professional services, nor even for payments made to foreign residents like royalties, dividends, interest, etc.
Exactly. In all cases, no compensation of withholdings is available, even though with the additional rule that was released later on. So one final question, I think we still have some time, is it says, is there a date when tax authority will start electronic audits? No, there's not a date. Also, there's no like disposition that has been included on the law. It's just the fact that the authorities have expressed their intentions to utilize the information that they already have. We did see an increase on the estimated income that's collected by the authority. So this could be one of the cases in which they efficient their procedures and therefore collect more revenues.
I think, Cynthia, we have come to the end of this webinar session. On behalf of GL Del Rio, my colleague Cynthia Yanez and myself would like to thank you very much for your time. We hope that this talk had been helpful for you, and feel free to let us know if you have any questions or if there is something we can do to help you. Feel free to let us know. We will be glad to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.